Welcome to our Lunch Learn on COAs and ARBs, so Architectural Review Boards and Certificates of Appropriateness. I had planned on doing this last year, but we ran out of time. This is some good information about how to work in historic districts. We have this Lunch and Learn series sponsored by Alderwoman Coggs and a few other of the alder people for the city of Milwaukee. And Alderwoman Coggs will be coming over shortly, probably towards the end of the session today. But we also have Lisk here today as well. Did you want to say something?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sue Ike. I'm with Lisk in the Milwaukee office. We're down in the Walker's Point area. We worked with the great leadership of the alders to come up with this series and help with it. And we run the ACRE program in Milwaukee. Some of you might be graduates. Next year, we're starting another ACRE program. So if you want to get on the list to be considered, and I want you to know I'm the lender. So if you have a project you want to work on, and you need financing, we can work with a bank or we can do it individually, but please give us a call. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. Today we have Matt Juros with UWM, introduce himself as well. We have Carlin Hatla and Tim Askin with the City of Milwaukee. Here we go.
All right, thanks, and thanks for giving the plug for Lisk. I want to talk to you guys, maybe talk to you too later after about our reception in November that you guys have helped us with in the past at the Nunbush and so forth. So talk to you guys later. I'm Matt Juros. I have a business card that is over on that table if you saw it when you came in, maybe a couple of you came in before I put it out there, and it says Architectural Review Board Coordinator under my name. And I essentially function to help people with applications for any work that's being done in the historic Third Ward. And we use the historic Third Ward design guidelines, and I'm going to kind of take you through that and figured that's the best way to do it. I am a UWM professor, so give me the topic, I can give you a PPT on it and show you 100 slides, but I decided today just to kind of look on the internet, which I think would be the way that you guys would navigate it to kind of figure things out. And then I think you guys said the same thing, you're going to do it as a kind of an internet thing, which I think will be as helpful as anything rather than the PowerPoints per se. Just background-wise, I think Mayor Nordquist appointed me, I think I looked on, I think it was 93 was my appointment letter. It's been a while, so if you do the math, I've been on it, on the Milwaukee Historic Preservation Commission for a while then, so 26 years. And about 4 or 5 years after that, I then became the kind of required, by way of the ordinance, a kind of liaison between Milwaukee's Historic Preservation Commission and its equivalent in the Third Ward. We call it an Architectural Review Board in the Third Ward, but it's sort of the equivalent. So I kind of sat on both for a while and made big kind of judgment calls on big important things that would be done in the Third Ward. And about two and a half years ago, I shifted from being the board person to being the architectural coordinator for the Third Ward. So I don't vote on any of the issues, but have been through that process for so long. My background in education kind of made it a layup for me to do that sort of thing. So I'm an architect. I'm a preservation architect. I direct the historic preservation program at UWM School of Architecture there. And we've been working quite a lot collaboratively with the city. I have some interns that have helped Carlin and Tim over the years and so forth. So my life is historic preservation, but from a kind of design standpoint. Okay, and guidelines and what you can and can't or should or shouldn't do with historic buildings. I will walk you through, you have this one thing, I think you got it, which is kind of a map. And it's actually perhaps underrated maps of districts, okay? And I think you guys might be able to also expand on that, where a locally protected district starts and stops, because this is really becomes a point of kind of contention, okay? Because once you're in that footprint of a district, whether it's Mitchell Street, Brady Street, the 3rd Ward, you do have to follow by the guidelines in order to get a building permit, okay? So we'll kind of talk about that process. But way too many times, someone will not understand where that exact boundary is drawn, and they'll oftentimes reference a building across the street or next door to them that doesn't happen to be in the footprint of the district, and that happens more than you think it does. So we'll have to be sort of really careful with applicants. And you can see the kind of red mark for the historic district. You see the green mark, which is the actual bid, and we actually do have authority over all the buildings in that. But without making this, a 2-hour discussion on this matter, the red really is the heart and soul of the historic district. And that's really where the guidelines are enforced quite deliberately by the board, okay? The green, you can see we have the Summerfest grounds in the green. What kind of historic preservation decisions you make about Summerfest grounds? So obviously that's a whole different matter. We try to stay very, very, aware really of kind of oddities and strange situations and so forth that come up. On the Architecture Review Board in the 3rd Ward is Alderman Bauman. He chairs the board. Jim Piwani is the vice chair. He's with American Design. You will see these when I click through. I just want to emphasize a couple of points before I click through. Jim Piwani is he's with American Design. Their office is on the Pabst campus, and they've done a lot of work around the city. He's the vice chair. And then Greg Patton is here with the Department of Neighborhood Services. I don't know if he'll step in or not. There's a required representative from DNS who has to also be on the review board, and the 3rd Board, part of the ordinance. And then Patty Keating-Kahn is on the board. She's a developer. She owns the Railway Exchange and a number of other buildings that she works to develop. So she kind of comes from the development community. Nancy O'Keefe is the former executive director. The new executive director is Jim Plaisted, okay? And he's the director now in the 3rd Ward. Nancy was the director there for, 15 years or longer. And she does sit on the board when we review things. Mike DeMichelle is a property owner and developer. Willow Tree, I think, is his company. And they do a lot of work in the ward. So each of these members has to have some stake in the ward, whether they live there or have a business there, or the alderman or whatever. It has to be someone with a stake in the ward. Although the coordinator doesn't have to as the coordinator, but my office chair, Lynch Architects, was in the 3rd Ward until it became too expensive for me to be in their little office paying rent and so forth. So, but I've obviously been working there well. And then the last member of the committee is Mark Lawson, and he represents my Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, sculptural professor there, and he gives us kind of that dimension or angle as a representative of a business owner in the 3rd Ward. So that's who the review board. That's what the review board consists of. We have meetings. Basically once a month, and you'll see them up here as I go through. So we meet once a month. Technically, like the city, you're supposed to have your application information in 10 days ahead of time and so forth. So there's time to put it together and have some evaluation. Generally, we like to kind of stick to that so people don't take advantage of sort of short notice application matters. We used to do it, you guys remember, we did it twice a month, which was more than Milwaukee's commission, which we do it once a month, our public meetings. We were doing it twice a month, which actually worked fine 12, 14 years ago. If you guys still have a vision of the 3rd Ward with new buildings coming in and Renaissance Place and a number of other residential developments. So those were kind of big projects, and we met quite often. But just by way of an overview, more lately is tenants moving into buildings. So signage and kind of lighting and advertising and sidewalk furniture, things like that are really what we deal with quite a lot. Although we do have, if you've seen the cranes and the piles being driven, for the new project just south of St. Paul and east of Milwaukee. Okay, so you can see it going on right now. Robert Joseph Development is putting in a residential mixed use over actually a We Energy's transformer is going to be on the first 2 floors, but he's bridging over that, and so we evaluated as obviously as new construction. Is it compatible with the rest of the ward? So you see that underway, and you know, coming across Broadway, not in the 3rd Ward anymore, you also see the development just to the south of the Grain Exchange building on Broadway. So some new big projects, but we've been really dealing with a lot smaller things these days. And what we have done, and Tim doesn't remember, but Carlin and I remember the days way back when where we really, the board reviewed everything, if you remember, Carlin, before we developed the consent agenda. And we were reviewing everything, and it was a rather laborious matter, if you can imagine that. And I don't know, 15 years ago, we decided that a consent agenda would make sense. So if you have just small changes, you can fill out the application with their staff at the city or with me, and if we look at it and see that it is a simple enough matter, at least I can in the 3rd Ward, I can give some kind of staff approvals, okay? Those guys, they'll explain, but they put it on a consent agenda, which doesn't mean the board has to sit there for 3 hours reviewing, you know, mechanical equipment on the top of a building or something like that that doesn't perhaps need real rigorous evaluation. So we have, and I say that because we've kind of tried to be developer-friendly, applicant-friendly, and really try to kind of expedite the matter so someone doesn't have to wait for a month because they have a little mechanical vent on the alley of a building in the 3rd Ward, which is really kind of small potatoes. So we do have a technique to do that, and I would say probably 5, 8 a month will be sort of processed like that by me without full review by the board. And then I would say at each of the boards, we're at about half a dozen or so a month, okay, to give you the scope of COAs and what we go through in the 3rd Ward, okay? So we do try to kind of expedite things to the extent that we can, and to, you know, continue to kind of strengthen our relations with permitting here, because oftentimes permit guys, you know, someone will come to them without having come to us. They have a building and they just want to put on new mechanical, or they want to put something on the back alley, and they can't imagine why a review board would review this sort of thing. But generally when those guys see it, they let me know, and we either then have to take it to the full board review, or I can kind of review it and see that it's acceptable by way of our standards. So you have the red mapping. You know, Carlin and you guys, I think I have this printed out by your guys here about half a year ago, and I see that we haven't indicated the St. Paul Historic Warehouse Showroom District on here. So this is an ever-changing thing. I do, as I said, I'm an instructor. I get about 12 preservation students a year, and I show them things. But in about a year from now, when you're in an office, Epstein Unit or something, go back on, see the latest, because mapping changes, things change. So you have to be kind of aware of that. All right, so here is our home page. Okay, I guess I won't go backwards, but if you just put in the historic 3rd Ward in Google, it'll bring this up for you. I use at a lot of my receptions, I use the TVs. They're so clear. This is a little bit hard to see, but the TV, I don't think we can kind of turn that TV, so we'll leave it that way. So it might be a little bit difficult to read, but so if you are, again, doing work and you're not sure what to do, and the reason I didn't bring a lot of applications or PPTs or guidelines or anything like that is that it's all on here. Okay, it's all accessible here. And I, like every other older dolt in the world, I don't always go through kind of home pages very quickly. My kids do, so if I find something, I have to have my kids to find it. But in general, you can kind of see the pull-down things on that very first page, okay? And the pull-down things are sometimes, you know, neighborhood things and parking. You can see we don't have to go through those things. Experience, dining, you can hit the dining and so forth. But really, if you are, I'm not sure the profile of everybody, but kind of developers, applicants or something, doing business. So that's the one you want to go to, and thank God that only has 2 choices. Join us, you know what that deal's about. If you are a business, you can, I don't know what the business fee is for a year, $50 something. And then about us, that says about, and contact us. So this really is the one that we want, okay? And space available is one thing. I don't know if some developers do that, that might be helpful. But the one that people will need is this second one, which is the Architecture Review Board. Okay? And this front page, what the board, I don't have to read through all this stuff. This is supposed to be a quick lunch and learn, but the process, kind of what I've already said, completing the application forms, there's my information and how you can get a hold of me there, and the Business Improvement District Ordinance. But really what you want are these things in red, okay, outside of the black text, because those, then you can see it clicks on then to something that I will click on in a second. But this home page is pretty simple, just like that. The useful documents, okay, so Certificate of Appropriateness, we have kind of this long form, 7-8 pages. When you're doing a lot of work, we also have a short form. It's kind of 2-page. I'm changing the sign outside my store, and so it's a shortened version. And then, of course, the instructions on how to fill it out. I won't even click this on. That's the schedule of our meeting, submission dates that I talked about. Bylaws and kind of procedures, legal matters. But this really is what you want, okay? So those are the 3 things you'd want to kind of work with if you were trying to see what's acceptable, or if your architect was, or whatever. You want these 3 things. Primarily the design guidelines, okay? If you're doing something with the Riverwalk, which is a rare thing, the river, most of it is in. There actually, we had a modification just approved a couple weeks ago to one of the piers. They were being shifted. But otherwise, those guidelines, don't get looked at a whole lot. The Third Ward neighborhood plan. So the neighborhood plan was, I think, 2003 or 4, something, Carlin 5, something like that. And it was sort of a rather broad-based look at how the Third Ward could develop and how it would plug in with the development of other districts in the city. And maybe some of you have already seen that. But you could click that on. We're not going to click that on, but we're going to click this one on. And this will give you the info. It's divided into 3 sections, okay? And I think somewhere it'll say the page, again, hard to read, but that says 54, I believe. And they're sort of double pages, about 100 pages. And none of you, including myself, can read this because it's too small, but it talks about what happened when the guidelines were put together and so on. And I just want to explain, I hope kind of briefly, let's see what happens. And you can obviously, it's a PDF, so you can print it out. All right, let's go down a scale so we can see the whole page. Huh. Now, is there a scaler down here, Tim?
Yeah, it's further
To the right?
to the right, or your left, or my left.
What are you trying to do?
Well, we can see each page. You saw when I was clicking, it was just zeroing in closer to the page, and I think that, there we go. Okay, so there's our table of contents, okay? And this may be the only page I spent any kind of time. Give me about 2 minutes, I want to explain this page, but this is the table of contents, which tells us that there are kind of 3 main areas of concern. One is the urban design characteristics of the ward. So if you do have an empty site and you put in a new building in, you can see how tall, how big, how fat, how wide, just sort of the very big items that would be associated with new buildings. The next one says buildings within the urban framework. In other words, new windows, maybe a rooftop extension, a slight addition, a modification, a change, balconies, things like that, and guidelines for what's acceptable and what isn't. And then the third category, at least in the text display, these are kind of very, very small modifications. You wouldn't even hire an architect to do any of this stuff. It's just to try to make sure that we don't get this kind of incremental degradation of our historic districts You know how that happened, Mitchell Street, but everybody sort of puts security bars out, and before you know it, everybody has a security bar. So we're trying to make sure that, even outside of this realm of the architect, that you have guidance for minor modifications. And a lot of times, these are not permit required modifications, things like painting and so on. So you'll see things happen in district. How did they approve that? Well, some of it, you guys will talk more about that too, because that has been really the big challenge, is the modifications that don't require permits. As a result, people don't come. They're supposed to, but they don't come before the commissions, either the cities or the third ward. And that's what that section of the guidelines tells you a little bit. So it's a kind of owner's help. An owner's guide, again, and I think the best way to understand it is the things that you wouldn't hire an architect for. You wouldn't hire a design professional for. You'd call the sign company guy up, or you would call up the street furniture guy, and you wouldn't involve any kind of design consultant. And this will just be, I don't know, I bet a lot of you haven't probably even gone to this and a click through, their infill buildings, how high and how wide they should be. Here's the spatial organization, the ward, these kind of threshold areas, street patterns as we in fact start to get the streets back. I think one of the things I'll be working on is to just try to figure out, what we can do with the Gagliano produce thing, which is cut those streets off from connection to the ward. So we're kind of constantly looking at reestablishing the street grid and getting it back to this kind of pedestrian feel. Street enclosure systems, again, you see kind of ratios of height and width and so on. And then things like street life, and we don't have, parking mid-block. We're very careful with where you can park, but you can see even on the left diagram, that's a kind of Broadway. You've all been down to Broadway, you park in the middle and so forth. So these were really kind of interesting. I have to say that it's fascinating the length of time I've been involved, because I saw the early proposals by the Chicago firm Nagel Hartray Booth. They did 40 years ago. Well, why don't we put Catalana Square, cut off Broadway, make it a pedestrian street. Cars will go on Milwaukee and water. It's really been interesting seeing this evolution, and it kind of come to fruition. Entrances of residential, off-street parking. Now we get to these, a little bit more of these architecture matters that I told you about. And, demolition, I see demolition there up on the left. The parameters for what can or should be removed. Variety in the district, design themes, urban, of course, so residential in the third ward, now it's half of it is residential. You put residential in an industrial building, a lot of other issues kick in. Operable windows, air conditioning, a bunch of other things. Street facades, so the guidelines were done, whatever this would be, it seems like yesterday, but 14, 15 years ago. And really the evolution and change historic. I was in Portland a week ago, just doing a lot of documentation of the interesting things in their historic districts. But it really is a kind of moving target. And Carl and I were just talking right before this meeting about murals and art painting on the side of buildings, and these guidelines say nothing about that. 20 years ago, we sort of weren't worried about artists coming and doing things. So that poses a lot of new challenges for us. You can just see this sort of architectural idea of solid and void, pierce punch openings, heights of buildings, parapets. This actually is one that gets visited quite a lot as developers want to find out how much they want to overstuff their empty lots to make their pro forma work. And so here you can see, without getting too focused on those numbers, that there's a minimum height of the tallest building, the lowest building and the tallest building. So you can see that envelope that you can work in as a developer that we've decided via the guidelines is acceptable. Balconies, balconies have been such a controversy. We let a couple of them go through, big regrets, 20 years ago at the corner of Broadway and Chicago. And that was Leon Joseph. And then the first Wisconsin ones on water at the end of Buffalo too, they have balconies. But since then, Einer Tangen and the rest, we've said no more balconies allowed on our historic buildings. They really ruin the facade. And architectural stuff. You get the idea here, windows and what's acceptable for storefronts. That's the biggie too we're getting because of the signs, street furniture, storefronts. Buildings really are really well occupied in the third ward, so we don't have lots of vacant. We don't have a lot of vacancy, and in general, and certainly the first floors have lots of new restaurants and shops and so forth. So, signage, lighting, this has all become a pretty intense matter. We get a lot of balconies, awnings, identifications, and so forth. Wahlburgers is moving into the third ward, if you've kind of heard that. And we've had these other national brands, Shake Shack, these other things, they're in other towns. And just like McDonald's did 45 years ago when they went to Winnetka and wanted to go in the historic village, we got to have the golden arches, and it's got to be screaming, and it's got to be 5 stories tall, and you got to see it from Milwaukee and all this. That was the first one. That McDonald's in Winnetka was the first one that the review commission there said no can do. If McDonald's wants to be in, they have to be in an historic building, and they just have to tone the whole thing down. And they did it, and a couple of years later, it was the most profitable McDonald's in the country. Bingo. So we have gotten corporations to kind of move off that point where they have to have their big screaming logo in their building, and that they can actually use the virtue of a historic ambiance actually to drive profits and so forth. So that's a little case with some of the new franchise organizations that are coming into the ward. Nope, can't do it. And they're pretty good. Dealt with the Wahlburger guy about a month ago. You want to put the big Wahlburger? I said, dude, can't do it. Not allowable. And they, okay, fine. So we figured out another solution to it. So, careful what you wish for, you might get it. That's kind of what's happening in the ward, all the prosperity that's going on. Okay, here, if we did do, and we have to periodically revisit the guidelines. It takes quite a process. You have to go to the Common Council, the whole work. So we don't like to do this every couple of years, but we're probably at the point where I'm going to collect up a dozen controversial matters, and we'll probably do an appendix or something to the guidelines as they are right now. So. But we don't like to do that all. There are some murals, art murals, Carlin. I'll have to see what. And so we have the appendix, I guess, tells you about the Riverwalk and so forth. So that's the guidelines. That's really all I guess I'll touch on. I'll be happy to take any kind of questions and so forth. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
You mentioned Mitchell Street. Are there any other historic districts in Milwaukee other than the third ward and Mitchell Street?
We'll get to that.
Yeah, I think they're going to give the overview. I think I'll just sort of conclude by saying the ward proper is a separate historic district than the city. So there's, we have to use our proper phraseology and so forth, because this word district, kind of gets used in 2 different ways. But there's sort of 2 districts in Milwaukee with two major ones. I see on the 3rd bullet point, you said the North Avenue one.
No.
And then a couple others. So they're small little satellite commissions. But the way I know the commission years ago, even before the 3rd ward, is Milwaukee's Historic Commission. I think that if you go to a place, I don't know how much research you guys do. Boston has 6. There's so many historic buildings. So we have basically the one, but we'll get that cleared up. But basically the one, the big boy, and that's what they'll talk about. And then this kind of sub-district within the city proper. So, yeah.
It's about murals, if they're supposed to get approval.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
What is that big one? The woman?
Yeah, I know. See, they all know. That's Karen Bell.
What is its purpose?
Karen Bell. Oh boy. Karen Bell is the owner of that cafe that looks at Catalana Square. She was a finalist for the Baird, James Baird, like best chef in the world kind of award. She didn't win it, but I think she was like one of them. Just a really great place, and it's in the 3rd ward. And the owner of the dye house wanted to do a different kind of mural. He wanted to do a mural, Chicago owner.
Can you use them?
Oh yeah, that's right. Recording. I know we're kind of like, well, what's the deal here? And he just wanted to sort of elevate this matter of his building being an excellent place. The dye house is the very biggest building in the 3rd ward. Okay, you see it from the expressway. There's kind of like one big thing that looms above everything else, white frame. They're now painting it. And it's the dye house. Back after the war, the Phoenix building next door was doing nylons for women, one of the most successful in the country for sure, and then things were being dyed at the dye house. Well, of course, like every other historic building, those were past days, and so it's condos now. Engberg Anderson is in the building and so on. So the owner wanted to do something with the north wall and came to us several months ago. And this is all, I always have to be careful about some of this stuff, but it is public record. Our meetings are open to the public. Our doors are open. So whatever happens at our meetings is for public consumption. And about 3 months ago, the owner came to us to give us like half a dozen options for a gigantic mural on that big kind of blank wall. It faces north. I think all you've seen that woman, right? She was painted on that building. You went to Italian Fest or something, and you saw her. You got a picture. We all have pictures of it. And they wanted to do something to it, and so they presented to us half a dozen schemes that are done in cities around the world in historic districts that advertise something great, and what they decided to do is that they were going to show or do some version of a big Giannis. Do you know who Giannis is? He plays for the Milwaukee Bucks. Yeah, you know who he is. You can't believe I just said that name here in this public forum. Yes, Giannis, however, alphabet, whatever his last name, Antetokounmpo or something. And it was great. You remember a couple months ago, we were all on top of the world with the Bucks. They were about to win the world. And they just wanted to do something, and I think one of the versions they had Kareem. At the time, he was Lou Alcindor. We were all excited. I'm from Milwaukee. We were all excited. Lou Alcindor came, brought us our championship, and he wanted to do just something for the city. And I get into that level of explanation because I have to say that those options were rejected by the board. And they were rejected by the board because they were advancing or promoting a private company. Okay, thus brings us to where I want to go with the mural thing. They were, and that for sure, Carlin, is said in the guidelines that you cannot have private advertising of a company, because we've had that many times with signs and murals, and we've had to have some of the Third Ward painted over. Lee Polachek, they did a real estate thing there about 20 years ago. You had to paint over it. It's on the side of Aveda, if you know that building, but not doable. We go home on Friday, we come back on Monday, there's Polachek real estate. You can't do that on the side of buildings. You cannot advertise for commercial purposes. However, that leaves it open, what can we do after that? We're just going to have a bunch of sort of painted common wall buildings, and some of these sites maybe won't be filled in for quite a while. And is there anything that we can do to kind of make, particularly in the art district of the third, can we do something? So it was a dilemma. It wasn't easy for us, but we decided that, for sure we weren't going to let the Bucks and whoever else, the Brewers or, a Nike or anything like that do that sort of thing. So they came to us. This is a world-famous muralist. Okay, his name is Casey Maclean. He's from Germany, and his big shtick is these art paintings he has done in Berlin, in Paris, in London, and they feature hands. Okay, and he has an explanation behind it, the community coming together and a bunch of kind of other things. And yeah, sorry, we got to get these guys to. But anyways, I knew that was going to come up, so we allowed it, and that's the framework of what we allowed, but we wouldn't allow any kind of private advertising. Thanks, guys.
Good afternoon. As was mentioned, I am Alderwoman Layla A. Cons. I have both the pleasure and the honor of representing the 6th Automatic District, and I stand before you today on behalf of my colleagues, Alderman Perez and Alderman Rainey. Together, we are graduates of the ACRE program and the creators, along with DNS, DCD, and LISC of the Lunch&Learns. We really want you to learn as much as possible to help us develop and redevelop the Milwaukee community. We just wanted to make sure that citizens had an opportunity to learn the city processes that would help aid them to better develop within the community. My hope is that you learn as much about historic preservation as you possibly can today. And if there is information missing on today's workshop or others that you see listed throughout our series, please let us know, because we listen to the surveys that you will fill out at the end, and we'll adjust for future years. We're really just trying to share the resources and make the connections and increase your network so that we can all help to build a better Milwaukee. Thank you all for participating, and it's one thing that I ask, that you share something that you learned today with somebody else. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Hadela, and with me is Tim Askin, and we're the two staff of the Milwaukee Historic Preservation Commission. The commission is an appointed body by the mayor. It's the whole preservation ordinance is part of city government, and it spells out do's and don'ts and how the commission actually works. And so our commission, I won't go into details, a lot of the information is on our website, as Matt talked about the historic Third Ward. And for the members of the audience, this is going to be confusing. I won't get into the weeds, but there are different types of historic districts. There are some that are created by Milwaukee's ordinance. And when those are created and individual properties are listed under Milwaukee's city ordinance, exterior alterations come to us in the Historic Preservation Office. And that covers a whole range of things, and I'll let Tim get into that. The other type of historic district that you'll see is the National Register Historic District. It's through the federal government, and it's administered by the State Preservation Office. There's a preservation office that sort of is the arm of the feds in every single state. And so Matt Jarris's historic Third Ward is an example of a National Register historic district. And there are certain benefits and advantages to being in that. There are different advantages and regulations to being in a local. And the reason there's a separate architectural review board for the historic Third Ward is that they became listed in the National Register, but they did not want to be under Milwaukee's Historic Preservation Ordinance. So work was done with city alders and members of the Third Ward, and they came up with a new way that they would have their own review board to review appropriate alterations, as Matt has outlined. And so Tim and I look at alterations to the buildings that are under Milwaukee's ordinance. And not to confuse anything more, you can have dual status. You can be local and national register at the same time. And that gives you certain advantages again and certain regulations to follow. But the best thing is, if there's ever a question, and we'll get to our website in just a second, you can see all the list of the locally designated properties and districts on our website. And for National Register, you have to go to the National Park Service and look at their website under the state of Wisconsin, county of Milwaukee. Then you get to the city of Milwaukee, and you can see all the properties and districts listed there. But ours are easy to find on our website, and I'll let Tim get into some of that. So the best thing is, if you are doing work, propose to be doing work, and that's everything from re-landscaping, putting in a patio, changing your driveway, putting in or tearing down your old garage, doing roofing, doing any of these things, always check. Our number, we have cards out on the table. Check in advance if you're not sure whether it's something that we need to see. And as Matt said, boundaries for historic districts tend to zigzag, and that's because if it's a district of residential houses, it will not include the 5 factories at one end of it. So even though they're right next door, they won't be in the same, they won't be in a historic district. So the maps are on the city's website in a different part. They're not actually in our web page. which makes it a little difficult to navigate sometimes. But when in doubt, please check, because some things, it's turned out some things, the city goes by code numbers. Everything has a code if it's in a historic district, or it's supposed to be. And there are mistakes that are made. Some buildings that are never historic, never were, never will be, have a code that says they're historic. And something just doesn't seem right. If somebody, always check with us, because we'll be able to give you the answer and then how to proceed from that. And I'll turn it over to Tim to show you how to navigate our website.
Well, I'll start from with the question from the back about the commercial areas the historic preservation watches over. So Mitchell Street is a big one, Brady Street, Downer Avenue. There's a small district based at the corner of Cass and Wells downtown. There's another small district downtown that's basically Broadway and water between Michigan and Wisconsin. Old World 3rd Street. I think I said Downer already. Those are the major commercial areas. There's various buildings scattered throughout the city that are just individually listed, but those are areas that you should always be careful, always absolutely be super careful to check if you're near Brady or Mitchell or Downer or downtown. We do have some maps available now. They're tricky to navigate, but they're better than nothing. As it takes its time. Where in the layer list? National. I already turned off national, but parcel. So that is the citywide map of what the Historic Preservation Commission watches over. McKinley, Concordia, a couple things downtown here. You get the idea. So what we review, it's very similar to what the 3rd Ward ARB does. Everything on the outside. We don't look very closely at your sidewalk cafe plan, but we do want to see your furniture and see that it's not a plastic deck chair that you bought at Walmart. Beyond that, we don't really get involved in the sidewalk cafes, but every window, every storefront, every door you change, most of that in commercial buildings, almost all of that requires a permit anyway. Not everyone does that. We've seen many storefronts changed out over the years without permits, both inside and outside of the historic districts. And that gets expensive because this is a city process, and anything that gets done without approval by the Historic Preservation Commission is subject to your standard building code violation fine, which is $100 the first month, and then $200 in perpetuity until it's resolved. And if it doesn't get resolved, it will get taken to municipal court, where fines are usually issued in the thousands. But that is just the bad side. We are here to help. We want you to get your design right. We have our commercial guideline book available on the table. It may have run out, but we have a huge box of them there for anyone who didn't get one and wants one. Let's see.
Just explain what those, just the categories, please.
All right.
I can kind of see.
We have a few categories on our website. Calendar and members, they'll show you the current year's meeting date and the current members of the commission. We have some overlap with 3rd Ward. Mr. Jarris and Alderman Bauman are on our board as well. The current chairperson is Marion Clendenin Acosta, who is an architect at Kaler Slater. We change our chairperson on a rolling basis every year. Historic properties and districts. This is where you go for an alphabetical list of everything that's designated. You can do a find and try to type in your address or street, but commercial areas, generally, it is the named street, but it will also include any commercial building that wraps around the corner. So on Brady Street, we have things with, designated that happen to have Franklin Place or Arlington Place addresses. On Downer, we have one building that's technically on Hackett. On Mitchell side streets, 9th, 10th, 11th, there's a couple addresses there. So if you touch the street or are within 2 or 3 buildings of it, you're probably included too. Every district has its own specific design guidelines, but for the most part, anything that's in the book is always approvable. We try to get certain things done quickly, like HVAC. If it's on the roof behind a parapet wall, we don't care. We'll turn it around in a few days. If it's on the back wall, same thing. We just want to make sure that it's not too visible. Sometimes we'll make you put a screen on the roof if it's too close to the front, or say move it back, but generally it's a fast thing. Signs we go through quickly too. The general rule for signs is type A signs only. Read your zoning ordinance for the definition of that, but only under very extraordinary circumstances do we do type B signs, and in that case, they would have to be hand painted.
The guidelines are contained within a report on that particular designation. So where you see the word study in red on the left, if you click on that, you'll get the history of the historic district or the historic property, and at the end, the guidelines that apply to that property. Plus, there are also guidelines in the city's ordinance, so it's a combination of the two of those that direct how work is done. And we don't do this to be punitive or to make you spend more money. Actually, some of the techniques that we recommend will save you money in the long run. Instead of using a very inexpensive, cheap product that is going to fail or that we've known to fail in 3 to 5 years, you may spend a little bit now, but get a 20-year lifespan out of that product. And we know from study and from working with historic buildings why certain elements are the way they are in buildings. Are meant to shed water or to do this or that. And when people remove them because they think, well, it's just too much of a pain to take care of this, then all of a sudden they get water infiltration in their building and they don't know why. So different parts of the building definitely have a purpose, and we try to help you get the best results if something needs replacing or whatever. You had a question?
Yes. When the historic designation is a site, such as the Kilbourne Reservoir Project, how do you monitor and enforce that it's maintaining what the initial study said?
Well, basically, when work is done on the buildings within the park, there are some structures within the park, and actually the reservoir itself got reviewed. The changes that were made to the exterior, to the formation of that mound-like structure, and then there was a tree planting initiative. And so the commission reviewed that. They were going to be as a celebration of the anniversary of that park. And so the commission reviewed that and where it was placed, and it was worked out very well. The initial plan that came before us was worked out very well. They were conscious of not blocking vistas of the rest of the city from up there and so on.
Yeah, so in a park situation, kind of like that, we do look at the landscaping too, but basically only to the level of, are you planting 50 trees? Are you bringing out a backhoe? Are you repaving something or putting in a new lot? Nobody comes to us every time they want to mow the lawn or trim a dead branch off a tree. You just go do it. If you're taking down a few trees, we want to talk to you, but if you're just doing your normal pruning maintenance, don't just go right ahead. Carlin mentioned the dual designations. Almost all of the commercial properties that the Preservation Commission has oversight on are also National Register properties, which means they are eligible for substantial state and federal tax credits from the IRS and the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. You'd apply through the Wisconsin Historical Society. That process can take a couple months sometimes, especially if you are not designated before you start the project. And it does mean that you get reviewed by both the state, well, all three levels, the city, the state, and the National Park Service. But it is a 20% federal income tax credit and a 20% state income tax credit. So it is a lot of money for stuff that, for restoring your building right. Mechanical systems count, so your building needs a rewire, a new boiler, new plumbing, that all counts, a new roof, that all counts towards the tax credit qualifying costs for getting the tax credit.
That's good for homeowners and commercial.
Homeowners get a 25% state credit only. They don't get 20% from each. I'm bringing up I've got the Downer Historic Designation Report, which, as Carlin mentioned, you can skip through. You should read the history. It'll give you a good idea of what we are trying to have you respect and match with any design changes you want to make in the district. But at the end, you get to the preservation guidelines. I've brought Downer up because it's the most recently designated commercial district, so the guidelines are a little more up to date than other places. But general idea is keep the building as it was intended to be designed to be. Never, ever paint directly on masonry. It'll wreck the brick. We also we take special precautions on every masonry project. You use the wrong mortar on a project, 5 years, the face of your brick will literally be falling off and you will have damaged the building in perpetuity. So we come out on city time to come out, check out the mortar, make sure it's a perfect match, make sure you've got the right chemical blend in there so it won't wreck the building. Windows and doors, trim and ornamentation. Additions get complicated. Talk to us the second it's even an idea in your head. Additions take months to get through, as with any kind of design review process. Please come to us for guidance before you have once you have anything past the slightest rough sketch. Signs, for the most part, follow what your zoning says and do a type A. We try to keep signs smaller than some of the downtown zoning areas would typically allow, but for most of the districts, the base zoning is a perfectly adequate size for the historic districts. And that about covers the major concepts for review by the Historic Preservation Commission. They meet, if it's not a staff approvable project, they meet once a month, and the submission deadline is about 3 weeks in advance of the meeting based on the requirements the Common Council put into our ordinance. Questions? No.
Okay, I have a few. Right on the very first page of our website, it does have the application for the Certificate of Appropriateness with an explanation, and you can submit it electronically to us to help save time and paper and that sort of thing. And then just to clarify, People are saying, how the heck do these buildings get historic? This is a surprise. Historic buildings, as staff, we do not make historic buildings or say this building is historic today or that building is historic. It's a process that's outlined in our ordinance, and it has to come from the public. Somebody has to submit an application, and that's on our website as well. And it could be the owner of the property, it could be a concerned citizen. Older persons have actually nominated buildings in their own districts, so it could come from any of those kinds of persons. And then there's a lengthy process that is explained on our website. Ultimately, the Common Council has the final say, and if they say yes, the mayor signs off, and they are official and legally historic. And then from that point on, then alterations would come through our office, and either if they're minor, they're things we can approve as staff, or if they're big projects, or if somebody's proposing something that's way out of line, inappropriate for that particular building or historic district, then it goes to the full commission for review. Okay. Any questions? I guess, okay. Oh, okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
So, I apologize for coming late. Did you cover housing historic homes in the session today, or is it mostly, is your focus the commercial properties?
It's kind of a mix.
If you want to talk about Sherman Boulevard, that's really a good
Yeah.
example of our residents.
I have a
Yeah.
specific question about the homes.
Okay.
I've been told, and I don't know, maybe you can set the record straight, that if it's visible from the street, or reasonably visible even sort of from the side, that's something that you want to be sure you have jurisdiction and control over.
Oh, there's jurisdiction over the entire house and backyard. The structures you put back there for a pergola, or, as I say, garages are a big one that people put. So it's not just the front facade. A lot of contractors have it wrong, and they give people wrong information. And they really need to see, there are lots of, the building code is very complicated, and there are a lot of things that need permits, and that they really need to check on that. Some contractors won't touch permits. They want you, the homeowner, to go and do the whole application process. But really, it's typically the contractor who should be coming in. You can fill out the application for the certificate of appropriateness, but then the contractors are 99% of the people who come in to get the actual permits. And again, it's all sides of a building, whether it's in the backyard, the side, or whatever. I know that's one thing. Or people say, I'm in a historic district, but my house is not historic. Wrong. If you're in the historic district, you have a historic building. So, and we look at it, whether your house was built in 1920 or 1890. I mean, it's the same. We look at the review. We see what's appropriate for your particular house within the context of the historic district.
And I will add that for the most part, if the contractor refuses to fill out the building permit or the COA for you, you should really question whether they have their appropriate licenses. I know some good, there is the occasional one or two good contractor that just won't do it and they are properly licensed, but for the most part, the reason they're not applying for the permit for you is they can't because they don't have their license.
Yes.
Can you still share what you were going to say about Sherman Boulevard?
I didn't hear that.
Sherman Boulevard.
Okay. You just want to know about Sherman Boulevard, or?
He said Sherman Boulevard. So I
Oh.
was curious as to, like, what, is there a certain area that it stops or what?
Oh, the boundary of the Sherman Boulevard Historic District, like all our historic districts, there's a verbal description, a written description of where this historic district starts and where it stops. And Sherman Boulevard, north of the statue, at the south end of Sherman Boulevard, where Lloyd comes in, and then all the way up to is a Keefe. So it's a very large historic district. It has, I think, at least 200 properties within it, so.
I just have one question.
Sure.
Washington Boulevard has some homes that are historic, but that's not a historic district.
Well, actually, Washington Boulevard, along with High Mount Boulevard, up to a certain point, where the gate posts are, as you go north up High Mount, is a National Register Historic District. The whole, everything west of Washington Park, all the way out to the boundary with Wauwatosa to 60th Street. So that's, but that because it's National Register only, our office doesn't review the alterations.
I did want to make a point, I guess, I think I can make this quickly, is that generally our commercial buildings, you tend not to have kind of owner sweat equity. You get a contractor to do stuff. But in the residential districts, and I'm doing the same thing on my gutters and things like that. And we have over the years, both with the Sherman Park Residential District, also North Point North. So they're very different kind of big mansions and smaller, more modest houses. But you do get a lot of, my brother-in-law is a so he'll change a window or he'll do the front door. We've had gutters there. A lot of beautiful details that you want to be very careful about that you don't often need a permit for, or people will bypass getting a permit. So our residential districts get this little incremental changing of really important historic features. So we try as much as possible with Sherman to let all of and they do have a business district, or they have a group there to inform the owners, typically newsletters, but we like to get that out, particularly residential districts, to let them know that they need review and approval. I guess that's where I was going with that.
Even if they do the work, even if the work is done by yourself, you still need the certificate of appropriateness. And actually, we're going to be doing a COA pep talk in Sherman for Sherman and Grant Boulevards. Sometime next month, we're working with some members of the Sherman Park Community Association to get that set up. So that will go out to everybody electronically and however the association there notices people.
Yes, if you want, that will be the residential version of this talk, so take one of our cards and email us and we'll respond when we have the date fixed.
Thank you for coming. COAs and ARBs, all those stuff is very important. I work at the plan exam as a plan examiner. We do look for those things. So if it's not, and you're trying to get a permit right away, we will put a stop on that and say, go get your approvals, then come back to us. Because we do check to see if you have the COA, and we check to see if what was presented to the COA approval matches what was submitted to us for a permit. So, with that, thank you for coming. We have one Lunch Learn again back in September. So, see you then.